Cafe, your podcasting source of great crime, suspense, and thriller writing. I'm your host, Debbi Mack. Before I bring on my guest, I'll just remind you that the Crime Cafe has 2 ebooks for sale, the 9-book box set and the short story anthology. You can find the buy links for both on my website, debbimack.com, under the Crime Cafe link. You can also get a free copy of either book if you become a Patreon supporter. You'll get that and much more if you support the podcast on Patreon, along with our eternal gratitude for doing so. But first, let me put in a good word for Blueberry Podcasting. I'm a Blueberry affiliate, but that's not the only reason I'm telling you this. I've been using Blueberry Podcasting as my hosting service for my podcast for years, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made. They give great customer service. You're in complete control of your own podcast. You can run it from your own website, and it just takes a lot of the work out of podcasting for me. I find for that reason that it's a company that I can get behind 100% and say, you should try this. Try Blueberry. It doesn't require a long-term contract, and it's just a great company, period. And it also has free technical support by email, video, and phone, so you can get a human being there. Isn't that nice? Hi, everyone. My guest today is a lawyer, author, playwright, and poet, who, among other things, has taught legal history and jurisprudence and practiced civil rights law, as well as worked in financial services. So he has an impressive resume. His written work includes the Peter O'Keefe Hard-Boiled Crime series, which has earned praise and awards. He's also written stage plays and short stories. His novella Dewdrops was adapted from a play. It's my pleasure to have with me a lawyer and acclaimed author, Dan Flanigan. Hi, Dan. How are you doing today?
Good enough, thank you. As I said, better than I deserve. I'm doing.
Oh, dear me. Oh, I'd hate to think that. You always wanted to write a novel, but ended up going to law school. How did that come about?
Well, I'm not sure. I
Know
wanted to
the
be a
feeling.
writer from the time I was a sophomore in high school, and found many ways to avoid or evade it. And when I look back on it, and I punished myself a whole lot all those years, and unfortunately punished my wife as well for, selling out, not doing what I was supposed to do. But I look back on it and I wonder if I really had anything to write then. And
Mm-hmm.
after you've lived your whole life, you have a lot happen to you.
There's
So,
a lot to be said for waiting before you start writing,
yeah.
because then you have more content to draw from.
And I never thought it would, but it worked out well.
Absolutely, yeah. What was it that started you? You started with poetry, correct?
Yes, I had written in sort of spurts occasionally over the long period of time between my sophomore in high school and when I really started writing in earnest. And I had a period in the 1980s when I was on a kind of a 2-year break from practicing law, and I wrote several plays. I wrote some poetry, wrote a couple short stories, and I wrote a novel. But one thing led to another. For example, I had an agent, I had a publisher for the novel. The publisher went bankrupt. On and on. I had a stage reading of a play in New York. I thought I was going to be on top of the world for about 5 seconds. Where do you go eventually with any of that? So
Mm-hmm.
I decided I'm going to quit punishing myself, and I have nothing to do with writing. And about 20 years later, if you got something like that in you, I guess it stays in you. And my wife died in 2011, and I thought I'd do a kind of tribute, I guess. She might not think so. To her with a book called Tenebrae, which is a book of poems, but mostly focused on her last illness and death. And that sort of uh, broke the dam, if you will, and sort of led me back into writing in a very serious way, and I've really kept to it since.
What inspired you to create Peter O'Keefe, this character? What kind of a person is he, and what do you draw on to create stories about him?
Yeah, the way I ended up there is odd, but I had no thought of ever writing crime fiction or detective fiction or anything else. I had read some of it over the course of my life, but never was steeped in it in any way. And the first two books, one was poetry and one was a short story collection, Dewdrops, that uh, I guess, not to be pretentious, but you might call literary fiction. But then I wanted to write this novel, sort of a fall and reparation sort of thing, and I thought I want to make this more interesting than just navel gazing. And so I said, I'm going to try to put it in this sort of private detective format and see how it goes. And that was the book that I wrote, got accepted by a publisher, and then, but in the course of, uh, I'm now in 2013. In the course of writing the book of poetry, I pulled that book out of the box and said, this is okay. This ought to be. So I rewrote it very extensively, and that's Mink Eyes, the first in this. Uh, and I thought, oh, that's one book, and I'll go on to something else. But then I had this notion of doing it as a series. Uh, and the first book set in 1986. I thought, it'd be interesting to take this group of characters and deal with, serious, quote, literary kind of subjects, but in a more interesting format, uh, and,
Mm-hmm.
and move it along as much as possible and sort of do the history of our times. And this guy he starts out, he's a Vietnam vet. Uh, like everybody else, he's a recovering cocaine guy and an alcoholic, and uh, got PTSD, although he won't acknowledge it or do anything about it. And he uh, he's divorced, has a daughter who's 9 years old in the first book, and uh, he's really at the bottom. And his childhood buddy, who's a big time lawyer named Mike Harrigan, sort of plucks him out of jail, gets him a deal with the cops to be, you know, uh, be free of it if he goes straight and narrow. I'm going to make a private detective out of you, and that's that's the start, the origin story, if you will, and and then the first several books are really him trying to come to terms with being a new person, as he describes it, a more useful person. And
Hmm.
and there's a whole theme of he gets tied, gets crossways with the mafia in the first book, and the books attempt to be standalone, but one theme in the first three is him struggling and dealing with the mafia, and it's also about really the decline and disappearance, really, of the traditional mafia in that period of time, but through RICO prosecutions and wiretaps and all that. So
Interesting. Where is the series set, and how much does the setting play in the book?
uh you know it probably, well, it's different in different books. I when people ask this question, I say a place like Kansas City.
Hmm.
That's where I'm from, and we had quite a mafia group in town too. But I don't ever say it's Kansas City because I don't want to be tied down to streets, and I want to be able to do something purely fictional if I want to. And so I never say that, but that people would recognize it as that if they knew Kansas City, and it's a whole Midwestern thing. And then down in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, not far from us is the Ozarks. And the first book, Mink Eyes, is in fact it's about a Ponzi mink farm scheme down in the Ozarks, and all kinds of other crazy stuff. And the latest book, no, pardon me, the book I'm working on right now is another kind of Ozark set book where a lot of hate groups and fundamentalist Christian survivalist kind of stuff was going on in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so I make use of all that, but without ever saying, I call it the lake country, instead of just saying it's the Ozark.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. I noticed in an article about you that it says you described the 80s as not being a golden era where everything was just so much better than it is today and with more hairspray,
Yeah, and
which I
that's
thought was
not me.
amusing.
That was the author of
Uh-huh,
the
yeah.
article.
I
But
noticed that. Yeah, it wasn't exactly an exact quote.
yeah, right. And she's very young. And I think she probably had this exalted view of the 1980s.
I
And
find that very fascinating.
you're
I
right.
think we have a tendency to do that. Go back 20 years and say,
Yeah,
oh, gee, things were so much better then.
yeah, with a whole lot of things. And I
Yeah.
never thought so, even though it was in a lot of ways good to me financially, but it was fairly rotten in its heart.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was some really bad stuff going on in the
Uh,
80s. And don't even get me started about the 60s.
yeah.
Talk about an overrated decade. Okay. Moving on. Let's see. You're still practicing law, so where do you find the time to do the writing?
Uh, well, luckily, we have this great sabbatical program in my firm where every 5 or 6 years you take 3 months off if you want to, and that let me sort of jumpstart this series business. And then also, I mean, I do a lot less law practice than I did at one time, and I'm sort of, let's call it, moving toward the horizon of
Yes, I know the
so
feeling.
I have more time, but it's I think maybe that in that article, I don't know, somebody asked me, how do you do all that? I said, well, it helps start out being a workaholic, and
And
that's
living
a
for a
very
while.
helpful thing if you, in certain ways anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that lawyers tend to be a bit workaholic generally.
Yeah, and yeah, right. And so that could carry over, although I don't have the same discipline writing that I did as a lawyer, where you're writing for
Hmm.
clients, their expectations and deadlines and all that. And especially in the era that I practiced in, everything changed to I want it yesterday. Uh,
Hmm.
and but with the books, I'm kind of uh, I wish I would get up every morning and write 2 or 3 hours and every day and all that, but it doesn't happen. I need to sort of wallow around in it for 2 or 3 days. But on the other hand, I've gotten 6 books out now, so it's all
There
right.
you go. Whatever works. That's the way it works. How much research do you do for your novels?
Uh, Varies a little bit, but a lot. The most recent one, An American Tragedy, uh, it I I did lots and lots of reading. Plus, uh, I did a lot of different things as a lawyer, but one thing I never was a criminal defense lawyer. And the book is about a trial,
Mm,
and so I had to really, even as a lawyer, had to do all kinds of research to make
I
sure
get
I
it.
was doing it right.
I
And
get it.
I also made sure that I had a couple of really uh, experienced trial lawyers review it to make sure, whatever field you may know, or you watch Law and Order, if you're a lawyer, you go, that's ridiculous. That could never happen. I just didn't want that to happen to me. I hope it didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't
And
want that.
yeah. And then like for the mafia thing, I, I, uh, I sort of immersed myself in nonfiction stuff about the mafia. And so I never want to be exactly like what really happened, but just to try to to be versed enough in it. Plus, one of the things I did a lot of was bankruptcy, and can't say they were all around that. And I was a naive kid when I was practicing law. I was all around those guys and didn't really know uh, what I was doing.
Oh
And,
my.
so anyway, it depends on the situation, but and then I'm no good at firearms, so I have to not only research but get some help from people. And I know I have one book where venomous snakes play a significant role. I had to research that. It's like you go down that road, and you say, "Why did I do this?"
I know the feeling. Let's see. Do you tend to outline or pants it when it comes to writing?
Uh, I do an initial, very rough outline, and I usually know where the book's going. Like I really mostly have the last page in mind and stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a whole lot in the middle that I don't do that changes. So it's a combination, really. It's not pure pantsing, but it's more pantsing than plotting, I think. It's plotting, but not a detailed outline.
Exactly, yeah.
Jeffrey Deaver type.
Yeah, Jeffrey Deaver just amazes me with what he does. I could never do that. It'd be like, okay, the book's written.
Right. And I do believe, not that I set out with that philosophy. I've done so many things that I hadn't planned to do that I think worked out very well because you let the story kind of take you places. And
Exactly.
so I'm pretty happy with that approach.
That's when you have the most fun, I think, when you're writing. When it just the characters just kind of tell you go this way, or the situation just seems to
Yeah,
lend itself toward
situation.
going a slightly different way than maybe you anticipated. Um, what advice would you give to anyone who's interested in having a writing career?
Uh, um, hmm, that's really hard because mine is so strange, but I guess it is. This is probably just what's on my mind today is be careful about following too expert advice too much. There's so much advice out there that is really formulaic that'll turn you into a formula writer. And and a lot of it's very good and very important, but what you need to do is be able to say, that's good, and I need to think it through. That may or may not be for me, that sort of thing. So it's one of those things where you have to want to be taught, but be careful about just following along with your teachers instead of what you really think you need to do. And, I don't want to say stick with it no matter what or any of that sort of thing, but uh, in my own case, it just turns out if it's really driving you, you'll end up there one way or the other, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted
That's so
always to do a little play where people like Shakespeare and the Russians and Faulkner and Fitzgerald and those guys were all students in an MFA class that were all got D's because they didn't follow any of the you know.
nice
So
idea. I like that. Yeah. Let's see. What are you working on now?
this is the fifth book in this O'Keefe series, and I managed to finally get out of the 80s into the early 90s here. And it's a it's about the rise of the survivalist, anti-government, Christian identity, racist, neo-Nazi groups around that time. The whole witches brew that ultimately led to the Oklahoma City bombing.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
that's
Sounds like you cover some really interesting topics in your books.
That's what I like so much about this series. I mean, having started out not even thinking about writing crime books, then writing Sal to write this one, it's it's provided me both an anchor and a compass in terms of where to go and hopefully dealing with some major issues, in human life and in our lives as Americans, and doing it in a little more interesting way, but trying to be somewhat thrilling, but realistically so.
Mm-hmm.
That's the attempt anyway.
That's great. I mean, that really is wonderful what you're doing. And is there anything else you would like to add before we finish up?
Uh, the I guess all of the O'Keeffe books and the newest one, American Tragedy, is just in production right now. Are also they're in every format you can think of, including audiobooks. And I've resurrected the Dewdrops book, and I'm doing a new edition of it. That is a. Hope I'm not running out of time here, but I added a new story, so I'm doing a new edition and doing that as an audiobook. And this one part of it, the novella that was the play Dewdrops, is a full cast audiobook. And I
Cool.
try to do it as a podcast, or I don't know how to distribute or market a podcast, but so things like that are in process. And also I probably should mention my website, Dan Flanigan Books, is .com is the website, and got some
In
things on there.
Interesting that you're thinking about doing that as a scripted podcast, because
Yeah.
I've been thinking about doing a scripted podcast for years. Hmm.
And this, since I converted it from a play, it's almost all dialogue anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's set up really well for that. And
So you just add in some sound effects, a little sound design,
yeah, yeah.
and you
I
might.
even have a song or two in it and stuff like that.
All right.
Uh,
Sounds awesome.
yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I gotta tell you, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and it sounds like you've got some really cool things lined up.
I
And
appreciate it. Yeah.
you're
Started
self-published.
late. I got to get moving here and things done.
You are an indie author, right? Self-published still?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the awesome indies. Yay, yay for us. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time.
Thank you. If I have time, I want to add one more thing.
Okay, sure.
I call O'Keefe a soft-boiled detective, not a hard-boiled.
Oh, I like that. Soft-boiled.
Right.
So not quite hard-boiled,
He
but
doesn't fit the cliche.
yeah, yeah, he's not a cliche. He's
He's
his own
kind of
private eye.
sensitive, so.
Well, that's awesome. I love it. I will definitely have to check out your books because I was looking at your third book in the series and I was like, oh my God, what happened to him with and I won't say it, but
Oh, yeah, a lot happened to him.
yeah.
Had to ease off that a little bit.
Oh my gosh, yes. Wow. I was just like, oh, I can really feel that. It's like, oh, ouch. So anyway, I won't tell you what happens in the beginning of the third book, but check it out for yourself. For everyone listening, I just want to say thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, Apple or wherever. We also have a Patreon page where you can get early access to ad-free episodes, as well as bonus episodes and samples of my work. I've been posting chapters from my novels there, so paid members can get, at a certain level, can get access to those. And I'm also going to be putting some news stuff up there, so that should be interesting. In the meantime, our next guest will be Ted Flanigan. No relation that I know of,
Oh,
different
really?
spelling. Yeah, really, spelled differently.
Yeah.
So in any case, I will see you in a couple of weeks. Take care and happy reading.